Anyway, so what is an OSPO? And you may have arrived here without knowing what is an OSPO. Here I give you a hint. It's an open source program office. And how are we creating one at UCL? So to go through that first, let's go to a definition, at least for one of the groups that works with OSPO, which is the to-do group. And they have like 4 questions, like what is it, why, who is there, and how is that working. So the what it is a center of competency for an organization to work on open source operation and structure. So that means that they are working on the policies and strategies that an institution works towards the open source things that they do in their company. That could be from training their staff to monitoring what the open source software they write and the policies that they need to be in place and all the stuff. Why? Well, so an OSPO would be internally as a API where you have a center place where people could in the organization connect to that and see what is interact with the open source that they are building. And externally is like as a bridge that they connect with other companies and other communities in open source software. Who are behind the thing? So in this definition, they classify like 4 categories of open source specialists. And they are like enablers, counselors, advocates, or environmentalists, not in the green terms of the word, but as how the open source is secure, sustainable, and working on that. And there are these 4 hats, which will be like people who connect with the open source communities outside the company, or the people who are training and advocating inside those places. I will say that probably there is also a lawyer that needs to be on those places, but we'll get at that later. And how they do it. So they do it by defining what the strategies and governance models and compliance and community engagement that they want to have on their OSPO. Now, OSPOs, many companies and many institutions will be called as OSPOs, where others are called something else, but it runs the same functions that an OSPO does. So let's look a little bit on different domains and see how they work. So for example, we have an industry, and here you have like a huge list of companies that probably you recognize few of them. And probably many of them started in the past having this kind of OSPOs just to cover their backs when they're using open source, just from the legal perspective, like saying, if I'm using open source, how am I going to get sued after that for using open source? But as the times are coming, and nowadays are more and more companies, so I'm going to pick on Microsoft, Microsoft is there, there's people there. So back in the times, they were like, yes, open source is a cancer, and they don't want to touch about it, and they don't want to know it. Now they are kind of the company that most contributes to open source across everywhere. So they have, all these companies have OSPOs, and their motivation for it will be different. And even though one would prefer that their open source contributions that they do is kind of as an open development that is sold to the community, that's not always the case because they will be seen as bad for business. However, you can see examples as in Google that they got Kubernetes, and then Kubernetes kind of grow in its own, and now it's its own foundation where all the decisions are not happening made by Google, but are made by the community that is maintaining Kubernetes behind that. Then we can go to government, and in government we have here some examples I picked as institutions, or some of them are countries, or like the European Commission, you have a whole set of countries where most of their goals is for getting a technical sovereignty. They don't want that a company owns everything that the country is, or the country, or the city, or the council is doing. They wanted that to get their data, their access to the things without having to depend on a company X changing their models, their business models, and then they have to pay way more. So I like to highlight a couple of examples. For example, in France, they have the Blue Hats movement, which essentially is wearing a blue hat, which is given to people who have helped open source in government. And that's a way of advertising that they are collaborating with other open source projects in a way that people could say, oh, why you're wearing a blue hat, and it's that. And they can get more people involved on that. In the case of Germany, for example, they have the tech sovereignty group that, They told me 5 minutes. So that it's a way of getting funding for open source projects. And the Open Codes page, it has a platform for many other things. UN, it also owns OSPO, and it has a conference called OSPO for Good, where they look at the Sustainable Development Goals and how they can apply to through open source culture in general, not only software, can apply to the thing. And then finally, the White House just released a report a few weeks ago where they are inviting their agencies to look at creating open source program offices in there, or to evaluate what they need. Now, we're in Europe, we are winning on the government side. If we go to the academic side, we are the opposite side. What you have on the right is, on the left, it's all US universities and institutions that they are within OSPO. And on the right, we got like the ones in Europe. The motivation originally probably was to do with, at least some that I know in US is like, open science, the funders are asking for publishing their code and everything, and we don't know anything about that, so they started to create the OSPO. However, things like RIT, they've got beyond that. They run like an RIC service where they help researchers to write their software, but they go beyond that. They go at how to build community around those open source projects that they're creating in research. But also, if not less, they have the LibreCorps team that they call it, which is like helping also community outside research and helping like projects like in UN and others where they can put more open source there. On the Europe side, we got the CERN get their OSPO announced last year, and other universities have gone there. But I wanted to mention that Oxford has something called OSS Watch, Open Source Software Watch, up till 2014. And I don't know what happened with them, but that's around the same time that RSC movement started. So I don't know whether that was lost because us or something else happened. So if you know, please let me know. Right, what are the motivations for an academic OSPO? So I say research, open science is a movement that is creating more things, but there's also education, infrastructure, and community. So let's look a little bit over that quickly. In open science, you want the requirements from the bodies, the funding bodies, to get those things up into the public. But also there's the reproducibility of this science. So if it's the open source was there, it's good, and that helps to reuse. And the collaboration, and hopefully that gets some rewarding besides just the papers that you get. In education, we can see the same thing, but instead of thinking on research outputs, you can see in education outputs like open research, open education resources. But also it's about putting a open source philosophy, open source practices in the curriculum, and not only training the students, but also the staff that they are working there. And infrastructure, think about everything that's running in a university, from the virtual learning environments like Moodle to the libraries that they have their own kind of publisher, because they want to get away from big expenses from publishers. And we got things in HPC or the web or content management or even the email. And yes, and having something like that, it will help them to collaborate with other universities. And think about JISC. JISC is probably doing some of that bit here in UK, where they collaborate with the different, between the different institutions towards something that it could be better. Now, OSPO, UCL, and UCL, that is under construction. We still have to write a business case, so I'm gonna tell you what we have been doing and why we are doing it in the next 2 minutes. So, how we've been, with the help of the OSPO++ people that have been helping us to tell us how we should do it, what we can do. But we are doing many things already. We are, as a REC work, we are supporting researchers and we are promoting their work as open source software. We have as well in ARC, in UCL, we have an open source software toolkit research team, which is a pot of money that we have, not much, but that it helps us to go to conferences and things about open source software. And at least they have given me the staff time, like at least less than a day per week, to work on building this business case. We also got help from the Stanford Wellcome Center, where they're also measuring the measures they have, and from the library, the UCL Office of Open Science and Scholarship that they got. No, that's not right. As to get the official recognition by UCL as to support that. Now, internally, we have got already running things like the Open Source Software Sustainability Funding Call, which we were giving money to researchers saying, if you need to release your software as an open source way, we can help you by giving an amount of money. We have been contributing to open source workshops inside the university to teach people how to engage outside the work that we do inside the university. And we started to capture some metrics, because that's an important part of it, that you need to know what are your dependencies, and we will help you to see how you can go beyond that. Now, externally, we have been working with other communities. One of them is UCL in the States, which we are going to be like the sisters of OSPOs, because we are created at the same time. And we have also an open source software London Breakfast Club to connect with the community. So what's next? Here we have a list of what's the next thing we have to do. We want to write a business case. We have externally and internal things that we want to plan. If you want to collaborate with us, let us know. And here's the list of people that we are being right now involved in this thing. We have also an email, open.source@ucl.ca. Start an email is good. And here's a list of links that you have to know more about it. And the time is over.
Thank you, Davide. It's quite hard to fit in those shorter time slots and still say everything you want to say. So just breathe, just breathe. So we only got the one question so far, so please add more questions. So if my institution doesn't have an OSPO, and to be honest, I don't know if my institution has one or not, where are they going to find people with the right expertise to form one? Because it sounds like quite a specialist sort of role from how you describe it.
So I don't think it's so much as a specialist role. So there will be different roles inside the university. So one of the things I didn't mention is what is normally called like knowledge transfers, or the commercialization part of your university, that they're trying to sell things. They normally have lawyers, and they normally write things about licenses. They don't really normally understand open source, but that would be something like to connect them with and then build on top of that. But on the open source side of it, probably there's many people in the university that are writing open source, people that are contributing, people that are participating in their communities. So getting them together, it will help to create that network of people. And then
so you mentioned the OSPO++. Do they provide like training resources or support for that sort of thing?
There is a set of networks, like there's OSPO++, OSPO Alliance, To-Do Group, and Curious. There are different kind of networks that are created around OSPO. So they don't directly provide anything, but they have the network around different companies and industries and universities that actually themselves help. So in particular, To-Do Group does have a lot of material on that, on how to create an OSPO.
Okay. So central RSCs are often quite well versed in many aspects of open source software. What does an OSPO specifically add to that? And saying, not undermining it, I'm just trying to identify what the distinction is.
Right, so RSC is doing many of the things, and I think that's why in UCL, ARC is the best place to run the things, and probably in many of your groups as well. There's things beyond that. As I say, normally you can help the researchers, you can help that, but there's like how you teach them to create the community around that, how that goes beyond just the help that you do on the software, but it goes beyond on reaching the community. Because when you are leading a community in open source, you have many hats to wear. And these are the things that we normally don't teach when we are as a researcher, as helping them to research software, is the community part of it, which, for example, the Turing Way or OLS is doing these kind of things, but how we can put that more into that. That's on the research side, but also is the infrastructure side, and also in the education side that they are not covering normally by doing research software. So that's possible to be like a bigger umbrella across those different aspects.
Okay, so I was going to finish it, but we only got one more question, so let's go for it. Does the OSPO engage with existing open source projects as well as new ones? And if so, how does it decide on to allocate resources between the two types?
That will be to the OSPO. So we don't have a goal on that, but for example, think about Moodle exists. Moodle is this virtual learning environment that the university has, and many university uses. And in UCL, I discovered the other day that actually there's people in our team, not in our team, in the university that are contributing back to Moodle. And we don't know about the things. And having that communication between all the other open source projects that happen and people contribute, not only in research, but in all the different areas, it will help to do that thing. Now, how they allocate times, that will be, I suppose, that measuring what is the the gains of this university to participate on those things. But if it's open, if it's more clear across the university that those things are neat, then they may say, okay, we put more resources on that site rather than buying it out somewhere else.
Great. Can we thank David again?
Thank you.